and welcome back to the Luke Deckard Show. I'm your host, Luke Deckard. We've got a really fun show tonight. I have author Gareth Powell with me. He's a very prolific writer, tons of books out there, a lot of sci-fi books. He's really, really well known. Really excited to chat with him about writing science fiction, publishing science fiction, what is important when it comes to plotting and structure and theme. Yes, it's going to be a really fun show. So yeah, like I said, Gareth Powell, he's authored several novels, including Silver Sands, Ack-Ack, Ack-Ack, and The Embers of War, amongst others. He's also won the BSFA Award for Best Novel twice, which is pretty awesome. And his Embers of War series is being adapted to TV, so that's pretty cool. So, without further ado, let's chat with Gareth. Gareth, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Cool. So we already have a few people in the chat who are let's see. I'm actually being told. I'm being told my mic is not working.
Oh, I can hear you.
Let me see if it changes anything. Does that sound any better?
Oh yeah.
Okay, there we go. My mic was not working at first, but I fixed it, so we're all good. Naughty in the chat says, "Let's get sci-fi," and Phil says he is here for the macaque. Lol. Cool. So Gareth, it's sci-fi when it comes to books is an area for me that it's probably my weakest. Sci-fi and fantasy are, when it comes to books, are my weakest points. I love it with cinema and I love it with TV, but it's nothing against, I love the genre, but it's in terms of writing it's definitely where I'm the weakest. So it'll be fun to kind of hear your thoughts on how you write good science fiction, because I find it to me it's just a daunting task, I think. But what I'm interested in first is some of your early inspirations. So if you think back to go to the Wayback Machine, what were some of the earliest like books or TV shows that inspired you to want to become a storyteller?
Oh, I can't really remember a time when I didn't. I mean,
yeah.
I was the eldest child, and my parents were both school teachers. So by the time I was 4, I could read and write, which was before I'd started school, because obviously a school teacher at home with one pupil is going to teach. But my mother took me and my siblings to the local library every week, and we could pick out 4 or 5 books each. And
nice.
So at some point I discovered they had a whole sci-fi section, and I think it was mostly like Heinlein, and I remember reading Larry Niven in there, and all Heinlein's juveniles, and the whole kind of what you would expect on a sci-fi shelf in the mid 70s early.
Yes.
So I kind of went all through that, and I was watching Star Trek on the TV, on the little black and white TV we have. That's probably one of the first times it was shown in the UK, actually, sort of about 73, 74.
Yeah.
So I was watching that. I didn't understand all of it, but just totally dug it.
Yeah. Yep.
And then Star Wars came along when I was 7. So
yes.
And then I was a lost cause after that.
So would you, obviously you have your literary inspirations, Star Trek, Star Wars, was Star Wars the bigger inspiration than Star Trek for you?
I think so. I mean, Star Wars is pretty much the kind of background radiation of our culture for my generation now.
Yeah.
It's become phrases from it have entered the lexicon, and it's become just a touchstone we can. But then similarly to Star Trek as well, everyone can kind of make a Star Trek joke or make a Star Trek reference very easily. So.
Yeah. They it's true they can, but I think I agree that they're both massively popular, but Star Wars might just have a bit of an edge to it, I think. Though I'm a big Star Trek fan. I'm more Star Trek than Star Wars, but I'm happy to. I can at least admit that I think Star Wars just has it beat by just a hair. So when you're sort of devising your oh no, I'm gonna skip that question and talk about something. What do you think about the idea of, because it sounds like you had quite a variety of books that you were reading when you were growing up. I'm interested in your thoughts on a varied literary diet. Do you think that's important or not important? Like, I know some authors will say that they don't read anything in their genre, or they only read their genre. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's very important to have a wide range. If you think of your imagination as sort of a compost heap,
Yeah.
the wider range of scraps you throw into it, the better the mulch is going to be, and the more vitamins, whatever you use to fertilize. This metaphor's getting out of hand.
Mulch, medicine.
But it would be. I think never reading in your genre is a big mistake, because you don't know where the cliches are, and you don't know what's been done before, and I think it's always noticeable when a sort of mainstream author announces they've written a revolutionary book. It's set in the future and features an artificial person. And everyone in sci-fi is rolling their eyes. So it's but also there's also, if you only read in your genre, then you don't bring in, there are so many influences around, there's so many ways of reading mainstream fiction, reading classic fiction can teach you ways to expand and improve as a writer and talk about the human condition in ways that maybe just reading old classic sci-fi novels wouldn't. So you should have to get as wide a range as possible.
What do you think? I guess give the listeners a bit of an idea. What's one of the books that you've read that you would say is so far from your sci-fi fantasy but it's a book that you absolutely love?
Oh, there's all sorts. I mean, I always say my favorite book is actually Generation X by Douglas Coupland.
Okay. Yes.
Because I read it when I was in my early 20s, as the characters in the book are in their 20s.
Yeah.
And it kind of felt, I was working in a call center at the time, and there's a chapter about one of the characters quitting his job in a call center, and it was very much of its time and of my time.
Yes.
And now going back, and I've read it every few years since then, and it's like a conversation with my younger self.
Right.
So, and I look back, and now reading it is, when I first read it, it was deeply cutting edge and kind of, and now looking back, it's just really nostalgic. It's like watching a Brat Pack film from the 80s or something. It's just like, oh my God, we really like that. So, yeah.
I like that. Okay, yeah, that's quite fun. I agree. I've known people in the past who have mentioned things about how they don't really care to have a varied diet with their storytelling, or with their books, or even with their TV shows and movies. And I always found that such a bizarre thing, because I guess similar to what you were saying, I mean, I'm just finishing up a creative writing PhD, and if I didn't read certain books outside of the genre, the book that I've written would not be what it is, because I took so much inspiration from things that were far outside crime fiction. So yeah, I think it's such an important thing. So when I see people, so when people are saying things like they only will ever read or only ever watch X kind of thing, I'm like, that to me feels like you kind of, it's more harm than good. You're not doing yourself you're disservicing yourself, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, the book I'm writing at the moment, there are references in there to the movie Casablanca. There are Shakespeare's The Tempest, the Canterbury Tales by Chaucer, and and the Maltese Falcon is mentioned in there. But there's just all these allusions, and kind of not necessarily mentioning them by name or just name dropping, but just echoes and sort of little tips of the hat too, and that just makes the whole thing much more three-dimensional, I think.
I think so. So moving on to writing and plotting. Actually, no, before we do that, so you said that from a young age you've always wanted to be a storyteller. Do you remember by any chance the first story you ever wrote? So I'm assuming it would have been when you were a little kid then.
I don't remember the first. Um, I remember when I wrote in school when I must have been 7.
Yeah.
And we were given a book, which was we were given lots of pages, and then they were sort of folded over and clipped down the side, so it made a little book.
Yeah.
I wrote one called Spiky the Dragon.
Nice.
Spelt wrong. It was spelt Spicky the Dragon. It was supposed to be Spiky. And it was about a knight who's riding along, and a mother dragon flies away from her nest, and an egg rolls out, and it rolls down to the road.
Yeah.
And the knight finds it, and it hatches, and the dragon comes out, and the knight says, "Let's be friends. I'll call you Spiky," and they go off and have adventures.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
that was it.
Have any of your childhood stories like that? Have they infiltrated or found their way into your books at all, big and small ways? I think you should. I think you should.
I when I was about 9 or 10 years old, I wrote a massive space opera epic.
Amazing.
Which filled 3 reporters' notebooks.
Jeez.
Like spiral top reporters' notebooks on both sides of the paper. And it was a trilogy because I ran out of pages, so the next one had to be like, oh, okay, it's time for book 2. There was no dramatic break or anything. But yeah, and it was basically a mishmash of Star Wars, Star Trek, whatever had happened on Blake 7 that evening.
Yeah, I love it.
And it was just chucking it all in. And, I was quite young, but I already had a kind of feel for pacing and stuff. And I think that did me good because I just threw all my childhood influences into this story and got rid of them.
Yeah.
And so when I came back years later to start writing a little more seriously, I've already felt I'd kind of worked out a lot of the crap.
Right. Yeah. You got the junk out of the way. I can relate to that a little bit. So when it comes to plotting, for you, what comes first? Is it story idea, character, theme? What is the first thing that kind of is that beginning kernel of your next project or whatever project you're working on?
I always liken it to the sort of the formation of a star, in that you get little bits floating around and they start to stick together and they clump together, and eventually it gets so undergoes fusion and you're away. So it's never like exactly one or the other, but I'll get some kind of idea.
Yeah.
Or my editor will say, "We want you to write a book," and I oh crap. I have to write a book. So I'll sit down and go, right, what can I write a book about? And so I'll get an idea, like with Embers of War. The first idea I had for that was I was reading something about the Titanic. And the article pointed out that the Titanic wasn't the worst loss of life. And it wasn't even the first in terms of Atlantic liners. Plenty had gone down before, but what made the Titanic different was the Titanic was the first one that had a radio, because before all the others had just sailed away and had never been seen again. Because at that point, being in the middle of the North Atlantic was pretty much like being on one of the moons of Saturn in terms of being able to be rescued. And then I thought, ooh, that would be an interesting in a space opera setting. If there was because now I thought you've got radio, we've got faster helicopters. If the Titanic happened now, there would be helicopters, there would be fast boats. A lot more people would survive. So I kind of transposed that in my head to a kind of space opera setting and say, let's have an organization. And I said, well, who's in this organization? And that would be like ex-soldiers. So maybe there's just been a war and we can have these ex-soldiers. And then from that, I go, what if there's a war? I need 2 factions. And it kind of just built out from that nugget. And the whole world. And then obviously, if these are ex-soldiers, then I'm going to need a character who's this and that, and the main, and if the ship is going to be an ex-battleship and blah, 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 blah. And it just, once I had the characters, so I had the setting, I usually get a setting and I usually get the characters, and then I start to write to find out what the plot is. So
I like that. What was the kind of the inspiration for in Embers? You have the sentient warship, the Trouble Dog, which is maybe you can correct me, but it seems like it's an inverse of sort of HAL 9000. It's because HAL is a bit sort of, in 2001 Space Odyssey, is a bit of an antagonist, whereas this you've done what's quite interesting here is it's a sentient ship, but also wants to atone for being a part of atrocities, which I found fascinating. What was the inspiration for that?
Well, in the world of the books, humanity never developed true AI. So the AI they have is based on sort of clone neural cells from people. So, and these are obviously they've got canine DNA stitched in for pack loyalty, because you don't want a rebellious warship in. And they've kind of had emotions suppressed and everything. But at the core of it, at the core of all the circuits and everything, is this kind of substrate of human brain. And after a while, they start to malfunction. And in Trouble Dog's case, she was so traumatized by the loss of one of her pack mates and the atrocities that they committed, that she develops a conscience. And so she is basically, she's at one point she says she's a 14-year-old girl with all the social graces of a missile. And that's kind of how I think about her. And I think that's why she struck such a chord with the audiences, because she is in that place that we were all in as teenagers, where she's like, okay, here I am. Everybody else knows what's going on. I don't, how am I supposed to act? Am I supposed to be good? Am I supposed to be bad? And she's just struggling to figure all that out. Well, at the same time, her programming is telling her to blow stuff up.
Yeah.
And conscience is telling her not to. So she's just completely torn and doesn't know what to do. And I think, we can all relate to that on some issue.
Yeah, I think so. I really love that. I really love that idea and what you did with that. So kind of bouncing off from what you were saying. Oh,
try again.
Hello. Sorry. Something I said during that activated SIRI.
It's all right. So yeah, bouncing off what you were saying earlier, about how you come up with the kind of the ideas and your setting and things like that. Once you've got that in place, do you have a really detailed kind of plot? Do you detail your plot extensively, or do you pants it, or is it a mixture of the two? How detailed do you structure your story before you write it?
I usually kind of write sort of about a page worth of outline, just telling myself the story. So it'll be they go here, they go there, then they go here, then they go there, then they find this, and then this happens at the end. So it's basically like a sketch map, but there's huge areas in the middle that I'm not sure about. But then I'll just start writing, and the characters will lead me, and I'll find out the story through the characters as I'm writing.
Right.
And I'll revise that little outline as I go along. But it helps to have an idea of what the ending is going to be. Even if I'm not always entirely sure how I'm going to get there. Fair enough. Even if sometimes I get halfway through the book and think, oh, damn it, I've used up all the plot. What am I going to do for the second half? So, so I've tried plotting, but I find plots don't survive contact with the characters. So,
right. Yeah. I always find that quite difficult as well. I can sit there and I can map out a whole story, but then the second I start writing that story, something creeps in that always begins to push it in a different direction, which can be really frustrating, because then you try and go back to your old idea, like, but that was a really good one, but now it doesn't fit. But yeah. So when you were doing Embers, there's 3 books in that. Did you know that was going to be a trilogy? Did you start off with that in mind?
Yes. Yeah. We the previous trilogy, the Ack-Ack trilogy, didn't know that was going to be a trilogy. It was a one-off book.
Yeah.
But then it kind of did. It won the BSFA.
Yeah.
And Solaris said, do you want to write another one? So, okay.
Yeah.
And then when I was about 2/3 of the way through the second one, I said to them, look, we're going to have to do a third just to wrap up these two.
Yeah.
So they went, all right. So it became a trilogy by accident, whereas Embers of War was designed as a trilogy. I wrote the first book, but I had sort of page-long outlines for the second two, and it was sold to Titan as a trilogy.
Nice. When you're writing, do you feel that writer's block is a real thing? Do you?
No. That doesn't mean I don't struggle terribly with writing sometimes.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, especially, I was terrible
Yes.
trouble. But I never think of it as a block. It's always either, the problem is always either I don't know what's going to come next. So I've got to a point in the story where, I've run out of plot and I'm not sure what I'm going to write next. So I keep in an iron and don't sit down and do it. Or I'm writing the wrong story and I have to back up a few chapters and, start again.
Yeah.
Or, I'm just procrastinating. I'm just sort of sucked into social media or something. So I think giving writer's block a kind of name makes it sound like it's an actual thing.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's just it's just either there's something wrong with the story or there's something wrong with me. And solutions can be found. So
yeah. What are your solutions? How do you push through those moments?
Sometimes it's just a case of sitting down and forcing myself to write something. When I do that, I find it's usually that if I'm stuck, the best way to get unstuck is just to start a conversation between two of the characters. Because conversations flow, they have a rhythm. So, even if it's just like, I once told a creative writing class just to, if they were stuck, just have one of the characters say the first word that comes to mind, like bananas.
Yeah.
And then the next character say, what? And they say, what do you mean, what? And it was, well, bananas. Why are you talking about bananas? And then, suddenly you've got a conversation going on. And, once you keep doing that until it reaches something relevant, and then you can go back and delete all the stuff about bananas. But you've started going, you've built up and once the characters are talking, they can they create tension, they can argue, they can bicker, they can relate plot or whatever, but you're going again. And I find that's what I found great about writing in the first person. Because my last 5 novels have been written in the first person, which I'd never tried before. Because I thought, how can you keep up a novel length interior monologue? It's impossible. But then I read Emma Newman's book Planetfall, which is written in the first person, and I just thought, wow, it is possible. So when I wrote Embers, I wrote it in the first person.
Yeah.
And that's great because you can channel the voice of the narrator, the character.
Yeah.
So it kind of makes it slightly easier, I find, than writing everything in the third person, like as the author you're describing, because you can just channel that voice. And if your character is a bit loquacious or tends to go off on, you can just follow that character's voice. You can just let them talk and just channel it and see where it goes. So I find that quite useful as well.
Yeah. Okay. On the idea of voice and finding a voice, how do you decide where this book is best serviced with a third person perspective, or this book is best with the first person perspective?
It kind of depends. I've found sometimes that writing from a first person perspective, space operas tend to be very huge and have a cast of thousands. And if you're writing from a first person, you can only see what that character sees and is present for, which can be quite restrictive. And sometimes restrictions make stories more interesting because you have to try harder and come up with ways around them.
Yeah.
Or you put in secondary or tertiary viewpoint characters as well, which I did with the Embers trilogy, which is also interesting because then you get to write in a variety of different voices.
Yeah.
So it's almost like playing as an author, you're putting on different hats and playing different parts, which is a lot of fun as well as being just an interesting writing exercise.
Yeah. When you're doing first person, do you which tense do you prefer? Is it first person present, or past tense?
Past.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on first person present tense? Because in the crime genre, a lot of modern day crime novels like to do first person present, and I find it an absolute headache, to be frank. It's hard. What are your thoughts on that?
Um, well, having just written a short story in first person present,
Yes.
uh, I did find it annoying. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, when you're told a story by somebody about something they've experienced, it's always first person past tense.
Yeah.
So if you're like sitting around a fire and so, oh, I went to the shops the other day and I saw so and so, it's past. So it seems deeply unnatural to have it first person. I mean, nobody narrates their life.
No.
That way. Nobody's going, I am walking along the road. Oh no, I have seen a gun. Um,
Yep.
it feels unnatural to write in that way, and it feels slightly unnatural to read in that way to me as well.
Yes. Yeah. I totally agree. My the book I've just finished for the PhD, early on, my supervisor sort of pushed me to write it in first person present tense, because that's what so many contemporary thrillers are doing. And I tried, and every time I was running these chapters past my writer's workshop and stuff, they were like, "This just something is off here." I'm like, "Yeah, it's this voice. Like, this voice is really hard. Like, how do you, like, as you were saying, you don't narrate your life, and when you're trying to, I it's a style that baffles me, and I'm quite surprised how many. I think it works. Maybe for a short story, I can see that being an interesting form, but for a long form story, a novel length thing, it is, for me, that is a very difficult voice to maintain, and maintain interest and urgency. I don't know. That for me is the thing, is I don't feel the, like, if you're first person present and you're in a fight, how do you step back from that and explain the fight scene and the feelings that are going on? Because if you're in a real fight, everything is moving. It's just a tornado. So I just feel like there should just be a tornado of letters on the on the page, really. But yeah. What's when you're, so let's, in terms of generating ideas, I often feel that is a very difficult thing to do sometimes. So sort of outside of the writer's block era, kind of arena, so your editor comes to your publisher's like, "Hey, Gareth, I want you to write a story about, I don't know, a cybernetic frog," and that's kind of the first thing you're given. How do you begin to generate the ideas for that? How do you snowball? How does the planet begin to form for you?
Yeah, I find if I sit down and sit with a blank piece of paper, say, right, I will now come up with a story idea, then that piece of paper remains entirely blank. Enough white space to make Scott the Antarctic start strapping on his snowshoes. But as I said earlier about the sort of accretion of stuff, so and usually the sort of main ideas and the themes of the story will kind of arise as it's being written, and I'll stumble across it, and at some point I'll go, "That's what this book is about," and then
Yeah.
I can lead into it.
Yeah.
So it's very much a kind of a sort of organic process, to sound really pretentious for a moment. That it arises, during the creation of it. It's like,
Yeah.
I guess it's like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example to do with painting or something, but
Mm.
all the sculpture, chipping bits off, and the form
Yeah.
reveals itself.
Yeah.
As you're doing it, you can have an idea what it's going to look like. But
Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of genre structure, because every sort of genre has its kind of built-in framework with how it starts, how you get from the beginning, the middle, the end. Typically with crime books. If it's the PI, you have the kind of the dreary PI who's approached by either a man or a woman with some sort of missing person or needs something, a rather simple case that they end up taking, and then it increasingly becomes more and more complicated. What are those key things that you think make this the sci-fi genre? Like, are there bits like that you think every sci-fi book or story will in some way have these sorts of beats or inciting kind of incidences that push it off?
I think with sci-fi there has to be something that you can't do in any other genre. So for instance, I mean, you could take the plot of The Good, the Bad and the Ugly and just horse it and tell the same story, but that would, I guess, be kind of more like your Star Wars science fantasy kind of approach than something that you could only do in science fiction. So it's kind of, and I'm not totally militant about that or anything. I mean, people write what they want as far as I'm concerned. Whatever gets you through the night, as John Lennon said. But it's, I think in order for it to really be sci-fi, it has to revolve around an idea that is a science fictional idea. So something to do with like the emergence of artificial consciousness or something astrophysical or so on. And there used to be all these strict ideas about, science fiction has to be what we now call hard science fiction or dull science fiction, which is just, a bunch of characters standing around in a room explaining complex ideas to each other. And I'm more I like kind of thriller paced plots and mystery and romance and adventure, but I try to make the science plausible and try to make the setting an integral part of the book, that the story could not have taken place anywhere apart from in that setting.
Right.
But apart from that, I like sci-fi that just goes off and explores all kinds of different stuff. And I think we're living in a kind of golden age of sci-fi at the moment, with loads of diverse voices and influences from other cultures coming in and taking the field off in all sorts of amazing directions.
Do you think science fiction is flourishing more in novels than it is on TV and film?
It's probably making bigger money on TV and film.
Yeah.
Frankly. And, I was talking earlier today. I had coffee with my brother and a couple of friends, and there's one of them's a just retired school librarian, and she was going, "Have you seen the latest Guardians of the Galaxy? It's the best one yet." And I was thinking that when I was kind of at school, the school librarian there wouldn't be saying, "Have you seen the latest Star Wars? It's brilliant." She'd be reading Agatha Christie or what have you. So it's become so much more pervasive in culture.
It has, yeah.
I mean, the Marvel movies now, I mean, they're even lost count. Was it 25, 26 movies, something like that? And various TV series. That mythology has gone from, a few geeks and who read the comics and stuff, like when we were kids. I used to love Marvel comics when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But now everybody knows them. Everybody. Guardians of the Galaxy, like 10 years ago, nobody had even heard of them.
Nope. I was a fan of Marvel, and even I didn't know about them.
I remembered the original incarnation,
yes,
which I think Stallone plays the original incarnation. It had Yondu and that old crew were the original ones in the comics before Star-Lord. So I remembered them, but I didn't remember like the Raccoon and Star-Lord and Drax. So it was interesting that they sort of came from nothing and became absolutely huge, and one of the favorite parts of the whole like sprawling mythos. Yes.
It's all right. I have tongue twisters all the time. Yeah, it's true. It's what do you think is maybe the best current science fiction film or TV show? What's the best one out there? Do you think?
Oh, I hesitate to say which is the best. I mean, I've really been enjoying Star Trek: Strange New Worlds.
Yeah.
Just because it's so much fun.
Yeah.
You know, it calls back to that original series that I enjoyed when I was like 4 years old.
Yes.
You know, it's set on the Enterprise. It's the same format, but the characters are just so much fun. I just love them. They're just amazing. I'm enjoying that so much more than I did with Disco, which was just like
that's a hard pill to swallow.
I kind of watched Discovery like the same way you would watch some kind of slow motion accident or something, because I just wanted to see just how crazy it was going to get.
Yes.
But once I'd seen it, it was just like, okay.
Yes.
And to be honest, the last season I don't think I finished. I just got a bit bored with. Whereas Strange New Worlds has taken it back to that kind of that original kind of format, but freshened it up and made it new and modern and fresh. So I've really been enjoying that one. I really enjoyed Lower Decks.
Yeah, Lower Decks is fun. Yes,
it was a lot of fun. I thought it was great to have something funny.
Yes,
but that was still Star Trek, and you could still get invested in the characters.
Yeah.
So that was great. My mind has blankened.
Were you a fan of like The Expanse? Yeah.
I binged The Expanse.
Yeah.
I didn't watch it until I'd read all the books.
Right.
So I only watched it end of last year, beginning of this year, and binged all the series from beginning to end and absolutely loved it. I'm going to have to go back and watch them again at some point.
Yeah.
The characters were just amazing. I thought it was great the way they took like an entire thick-ass novel and condensed it down into like an episode and a half or something.
Right.
Yeah. But without losing the general kind of storyline. So
yeah.
They all kind of 9 books into 6 series or whatever. I don't know. Actually, they didn't do the last couple of books, did they? They finished it early, but
yeah.
I mean, that was a shame that there were plot lines just starting.
Yeah.
That never got resolved because having read the books, I knew where they were going, but.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened with The Expanse. I think I remember there being a moment where I think they had to sort of rush a couple of books. They didn't know if they were going to get any more seasons. Yeah. And then they got some more seasons, but then it ended. So I think it's sort of I kind of don't blame the show. I think it's more of an Amazon Prime Studios problem than the show itself. Because you mentioned Star Trek, I'm curious because you're a big fan of the show when you were a kid, and you're a fan of it now. When you have properties like science fiction properties like Star Trek, for you as a sci-fi guy, when you see something like Strange New Worlds, which is in some ways similar to TOS, but continuity wise, is diverges quite a bit. Does that bug the sci-fi nerd guy in you, or are you happy to just roll with it and see it as its own unconnected thing, or do you see it connected?
Well, the thing is, being British, I grew up with Doctor Who, and
right. Yes,
when you look at the continuity over a 60-year-long TV series, I mean, I think he's the number of times I've been to Pompeii, or there are a couple of like 2 or 3 episodes where they surely must have just met themselves going the other way at some point.
Yes.
And then there's like, there's on the TV movie, he claimed he was half human and they retconned it. No, he wasn't. He was just making it up. And it's just, so you can't get to, I mean, people have tried to impose a sort of continuity on Doctor Who, end up going slightly mad, I think, because they can't. And so, I think having continuity is reassuring for an audience.
Mm.
I think if it becomes a straitjacket,
Right.
then it's it harms the stories. And I will be perfectly satisfied if at the end of Strange New Worlds, Pike finds a way to escape his fate, and
Right.
that won't invalidate the original episodes with, when he's like in the wheelchair with the two lights.
Yeah.
But come on, guys, this is the 24th century. You got, even Hector Salamanca had more going for him than that. But it's, that won't invalidate it. It'll just be like a new kind of, we've gone into a new parallel timeline or whatever.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
That's good.
I do actually think that Strange New Worlds might be doing that, because the which episode was it? The Khan episode. I'm assuming you've seen all of the recent ones, right? So the Khan episode, there's actually a moment where one of the characters, the lady who's trying to assassinate Khan, says a line where she's been there since the 90s, because that's when Khan should have risen to power, but he hasn't yet for some reason.
Yeah.
So I think they're actually starting to build that into their show, so they can just continue the show in their own continuity without needing to retread entirely over TOS and Next Generation and whatnot, which I think is probably a smarter idea. It's probably a good idea to do that.
Yeah, because in Trek lore, we're in real life catching up with the date when the Third World War is supposed to have happened.
Yes.
So they're going to have to come up with a reason why that not happened.
Yeah. So that was a random Star Trek tangent. When you're writing, do you ever look at like Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey? Do you find that a framework that is ever helpful or not?
I think it's, as a writer, you have to be aware of it. I find it's been so overused that it becomes slightly irritating when you realize that's what's happening in the book you're reading.
Yeah.
I mean, Star Wars Episode 4 is the quintessential hero's journey, absolute beat for beat. And it's a good kind of structure, but people who slavishly follow it, the same as way people who slavishly follow like the 3-act structure, and you have to have beat 1 here, beat 2 here, and beat 2. If I try to do that, it murders the writing. So I kind of plot and pace instinctively.
Yeah.
But I keep in mind that, well, maybe we should have a scene somewhere around here where the protagonist is a bit reluctant, or we're about halfway through, we need to kind of throw in a curveball or something. So I think to have it as an idea that there is a kind of overall structure to like a lot of myths and legends is good to be aware of, but there are many different structures, and
absolutely
trying to slavishly stick to one is going to hurt the story.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I'm a big fan of Campbell's work, and actually, for those who do ever, if you do go and read his stuff, like he's the way he breaks down all the different myths and religions. He doesn't. It's not really, while there is a kind of a hero's journey. Even that, I think over time people have simplified it way more than even what he did. I think there were so many different avenues that hero's journey can take. I kind of, as you were saying, those curveballs happen at different points and for different reasons. But yeah, I think it's a good thing for sure to have in mind. I agree with that. What for you, what makes good science fiction?
I do.
I love it. But
no, as I said, to go back, stories that can only take place in a science fiction setting. Stories that show us something we can't see anywhere else. Stories that talk about who we are and in relation to the cosmos, in relation to technology. Who we are as a species, where we've come from, where we're going. What do we do while we're here? That is the kind of the sweet spot that sci-fi is just brilliantly placed just to talk about what it means to be human in a vast and baffling cosmos.
Yeah.
It's,
How important then, because it's kind of you've touched on it a little bit, but how important is theme in science fiction?
theme.
Yes, as in like, so you were, as you're mentioning there, like, it's a good model for talking about, what does it mean to be human. So that could be the theme of someone's story, or something along those lines. So how important is a particular theme to someone's science fiction, someone's science fiction?
I think if you haven't got a theme,
Mm.
and the theme might not necessarily arise consciously, as I said, and you're like halfway through the book, or until you finished it, you'll look back and go, there's a theme here, I can pick it out. But without theme, I think a story without a theme is kind of, like Shakespeare said, all sound and fury signifying nothing. There has to be a point to the story, and I think of the theme as the point to the story. So a lot of my novels have several themes going at the same time, but it's usually about like what it means to be human, the nature of loss, the nature of grief, the nature of love, and the nature of human destiny, for want of a better word, or human being human when maybe physically you aren't quite human, or so on. So it's you can have all these kind of themes sort of bubbling under that make the story, that give the story relevance and give the story its heart.
Yeah. Do you think there's every once in a while there's maybe certain science fiction and puts too much emphasis on sci-fi action, and it sort of overpowers any sort of interesting thematic ideas that are trying to come out?
Well, I mean, in movies, you can do space battles better than you can in books.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've described a few space battles, but they're much less flashy in prose, because you just write about what's. Whereas if you've got a huge budget and a cinema screen, you can just have thousands of spaceships whizzing about everywhere.
Yeah.
So I think I read a really bad thriller once. I won't say what it was, but they described, and it was a thriller based on a book that was made into a successful movie franchise. And this was like another ghost written book. Somebody ghost writing it. But they described this motorcycle chase, and it was the worst bit of writing I've ever read, because it was like he drove up, he revved the accelerator, he turned right, he turned left, he looked back.
Oh God!
Bad guy turned right and turned left, and it was just the most awful piece of nonsense. So I think that's the difference between sort of transposing screen sci-fi and written sci-fi. In written sci-fi, the spectacles have to be things that fire the imagination.
Yeah.
So they have to be, something, as I said before, something you can't possibly see anywhere else.
Yeah.
I've forgotten the question now, but that's the answer.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. That's a good answer. I like it. It works. How often for you? Because you mentioned that the thing with sci-fi is that it has to be sort of built around something that can only happen in a science fiction world. How often does real life technology inspire or influence your work? You look at something, it's like, I could take something and make something really insane out of that, and that would just make this particular book or story sing.
I can't remember who said it. It may have been Cory Doctorow, but they said the best way to predict the future is to predict the present. So a lot of sci-fi is, especially traditional sci-fi, is kind of what if. So you look at one episode, one ingredient of today, and twist it and say, well, what happens if this goes, out of control? And then you explore the ramifications from that, which makes for good stories. A lot of Philip K. Dick stories are like that. They're just like, they seem to be set in 1960s America, but 1960s America that has invented psi powers, or 1960s America that is on the moon. And so a lot of it is just, but I mean, nowadays we know that history and reality are far messier than they seemed in those days. So you can't just tweak one bit of society and assume that in 100 years that's the only thing that will have changed. So you have to maybe tweak 2 or 3 different things and smash them together to see what the unexpected outcomes are.
What do you think it is about science fiction that makes it so inspiring to our reality then? So, for example, Star Trek, the guy who invented the cell phone based it off of the communicators, so what is it that makes sci-fi so appealing in that way?
I think it's the fact that, especially with Star Trek, it's the idea that we will solve all our problems and we will move forward and we will be better. We will put aside greed, we will put aside hunger, we will work together, we will explore the universe. Star Trek is basically, it's a post-scarcity society when nobody goes hungry, nobody needs to work for a living, people work for their own education and their own enjoyment. You could spin it as a complete socialist paradise, utopia. Which tends to anger a lot of Star Trek fans when you do, because it's also presented as a very American kind of future. So, and neither one is right or better. But you can look at it in a variety of different ways. So it's that idea that as a human species, we will be better and we will look after ourselves better. And we will put aside all the crap that led to the Third World War, which we will survive and carry on. And, I guess in the 60s, the idea of the Third World War being imminent was very pervasive. I mean, all the sci-fi, even William Gibson in Neuromancer posits there's going to be a Third World War before the 1980s. So it's very much an optimistic thing. And now writing science fiction, you kind of have to think about climate change, about all the problems we're facing on this earth, and think, well, there will be a way to escape them. And so it's very optimistic to think that even if something like The Expanse, they get out into space and it's still humans squabbling and shooting each other, at least we made it that far. That's still quite optimistic. So I think that's one of the things. But also when you see these people in the future doing this great stuff, I think in Minority Report, where Tom Cruise was like doing this with the computer screens, and suddenly people were inventing those kind of computer screens. It's that you see that cool stuff and people think, whoa, that's cool. I wonder how we can do that. And it gets them gets the brain going. And
on kind of moving on to your publishing journey, we'll kind of wrap up with a few questions about publishing. What was your journey from you've written your first story, your first book? Did you approach agents? Did you approach publishers? What was your avenue?
I wrote my first novel. Or should I say I finished my first novel around about 2002. Took 2 years to write. And I sent it off to a bunch of agents and got a bunch of no thanks back. A couple of nice ones, but mostly like no thank you. So I kind of put it aside and I started writing short stories. And I had a few published on sort of free online sort of fan sites where people get their stories published and then they all critique each other's stories in the comment section. And when I thought I had one that was good enough, I sent it to Interzone magazine. And Interzone, when I was like in the 90s, I was reading Interzone as a student, and that was kind of my Everest. Like, one day I will get a story in Interzone. And they accepted it, and then I had a couple of stories in Interzone, and that led to being approached by small presses to publish my first novel and my first short story collection.
Cool.
And then that gave me enough profile kind of in the sort of British UK genre scene, and I'd started going to conventions as well. That when I approached Solaris, the following year and pitched them what was going to be my first sort of properly published novel, The Recollection.
Yeah.
They knew who I was, and they were willing to listen and willing to work. And
cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Rejection is a huge part of this game. How do you handle, deal with the rejection? Because I think there's some people out there who, it's tough, and it's something that just continues no matter, well, depending on who you are. Like, you can have a good level of success, but you're still having to deal with various forms of rejections. So what's your sort of coping mechanism to just deal with those?
It's difficult because when you're writing like this, and you're like, I am a writer, so much of your self-image is tied up with the success of your work.
Yeah.
That you can't help but feel some of it. You take it personally. I mean, you can't help it. But it just becomes one of those things where you just have to kind of shrug it off and think, well, there are so many reasons I might be rejected.
Yeah.
Especially at the moment, with budgets are squeezed. Publishers are, not taking on so many new writers, loath to take more risks, and so on.
Yeah.
That it's not necessarily anything to do with your work. It can be a multitude of other factors. You just have to have a plan B and just keep on keeping on.
Well, I mean, so in terms of plan B, I mean, what's your opinion on individuals who are trying the traditional route, don't get very far, so thought, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna self-publish, because self-publishing is becoming a bit more, it's upped its game in the past kind of 10 years. There are certain, you can rival a traditionally published book if you do the right things.
I'm all for that. I've self-published a couple of books. My the first two books I mentioned there, the short story collection and that first novel, from small presses. Both the small presses went out of business a few years ago, so I self-published the books just to keep them in print. Just for posterity. So I've got nothing against self-publishing. I think, good luck to everyone. What would worry me about switching to self-publishing now at this precise moment is that Amazon is becoming swamped with AI-generated ebooks.
Yes, it is.
It was already hard to stand out and to get yourself noticed as a self-publisher. And now I'm very, I tried to say worried and wary at the same time. I'm very wary about what that landscape is going to look like in a few years, because it's going to be swamped to the point of how do you find the needle of good fiction in the haystack of absolute bullshit.
Yes.
So
Yeah, it is quite true. I guess the other difficult thing is anyone looking for books on Amazon, I guess the casual reader probably won't really know what is self-published and what is traditional and what is self-published AI and what isn't, if you're not really looking at things. I'm very, what is your take on the whole sort of AI coming into the writing sphere, wanting to replace, studios blatantly want it to replace writers. There's no, and it's going to be a matter of time before publishers are going to want to do the same thing, if they're not already talking about it behind closed doors. What's your view on this? This sort of, behemoth that we're facing right now.
I think it's inevitable. Once these things get out, they get used. And I don't think there's any realistic way of stopping people from using them. No. Unfortunately, I think it's going to be very, very bad. For me, it's like, a chimpanzee does a painting and people hang it up in a gallery. Talk about themes, use of, and you think, is it, or did he just like bright colors? And with AI, there isn't even the brain of a chimp in there. It's just like a very sophisticated prediction text predictor. So it's got no sense of meaning. It's got no understanding of what it's writing. It's just predicting word should go next.
Yeah.
And a lot of that prediction is based on works by humans that have been fed into the machine without those humans' permission. So basically, I tend to feel it's kind of plagiarism.
Yes.
I think writing a book using AI and then trying to sell it to somebody is, I don't know. I mean, writing a book by AI does not make you an author the same way as microwaving a ready meal does not make you a chef.
Yes. I love that.
There's no art has a function, and the function of art is to talk about who we are and to break, encourage empathy, encourage understanding, discuss big themes: life, death, sex, jealousy. And what can a prediction engine tell us about those things?
Exactly.
Now, I can understand publishers like you have your Lee Childs of the world who churn out 8 million thrillers that are pretty much totally formulated exactly the same.
Yeah.
You could probably plug all them into an AI and say to the AI, Lee's retiring. Can you write the next 80 Jack Reacher books? And the AI would go, sure.
Yeah.
What do you want me to do this afternoon? And, and you could, for people who just want to read that same stuff, then I can see that happening easily because they don't have to pay Jack's $600,000 for each novel or whatever he earns. I have no idea. They just press a button and a new one spits out. And and late stage capitalism. If we can get rid of workers, we will save money and make more profits.
Yes.
And that's what's going to happen. Unfortunately, as novelists, we always kind of thought we were safe.
Yeah.
And it turns out we're going to be among the first. So
absolutely, yeah. It's a really scary future ahead, I think. And I mean, again, watching the whole sort of writer's strike and things like that going on, the whole discourse around that is such a fascinating thing because you see one side where individuals are saying, look, if AI can write a film just as good as Fast and the Furious, why would I pay? Why pay for you if your writing isn't any better than this? And so I also think this is also going to be a real challenge for writers. They really are going to have to up their game to prove themselves, I think. But yeah, we have one comment in the chat. Bonnie McBird's listening. She doesn't totally. She says she disagrees with that. That we will not be among the first.
No, I kind of agree with Bonnie there. There are whole industries that have already been destroyed by automation. She says AI is close, not close yet in storytelling. But I mean, you don't have to wander far into Amazon to find AI produced books.
Yes,
There are people proudly touting they've got children's books that they've written and an AI write and an AI do the pictures for.
I know.
So I mean, this is the thin end of the wedge. It's and this came out of nowhere over the last year. So who on earth knows where we'll be this time next year?
Yeah.
We're just talking about the stuff they've released. I mean, the stuff they haven't released yet.
Yes, that's very true. Yeah, I mean, she mentions that movie extras are in trouble. I mean, that's for sure, that's true. But I think that the whole everyone who's in the creative industry, everyone is going to be at risk. Whether you're the writer, whether you're an extra, whether you're the coffee guy, like everyone is going to be at risk in the near future with this. So it's a strange, scary future ahead, I think, for writers. But I also what I'm hopeful for is that I would like to think that out of all of this sort of inauthentic art, that people are going to be hungry for authenticity, and that they will seek out the authentic writers, the authentic stories that are out there in the same way that once you're churning out blockbusters, whether that's a novel blockbuster or a film blockbuster, and they become boring and formulaic, people then start turning towards the indie stuff because that's where they're finding the more meatier stories. And I'm kind of hoping that as AI it becomes more prevalent in the entertainment industry, that people will be smart enough to seek out the authentic stuff that's out there. Because I think, as you said, AI will never ever, no matter how much you plug in, will be able to replicate the human experience. But yeah.
There's also an Ouroboros effect where
Mm.
AI is drawing on books written by AI as kind of, and so it's starting to swallow its own tail, and so it's like a photograph of a photograph of a photograph of a photograph. It could enter into a sort of death spiral of imitating itself till it just disappears.
Yeah. I mean, that would be all right. I mean, that in and of itself sounds like a good science fiction book.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, we've been chatting for about an hour, so we'll wrap this up now. Gareth, this was a lot of fun. I enjoyed chatting about science fiction, your writer's journey, what makes good science fiction from your perspective, and I agree with pretty much everything you had to say. It's a fun genre. It's a clever genre, and it's definitely not easy to do. That's for sure. One moment, someone in the chat says Snowden 34321 says, big fan of Gareth's work. Got the Embers trilogy. Arrive me tomorrow. Can't wait to dig in. So yeah, enjoy that, people. Go buy Gareth's books. There's a link down in the description of this video if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening on Spotify later on. There will be a link there as well. So yeah, go purchase all of his books. Gareth, where can people find you on social media?
Pretty much everywhere. But I'm on Twitter for now as @GarethLPowell. I'm on Blue Sky @GarethLPowell.bluesky, whatever. I'm on Substack as Gareth L. Powell, and Gareth L. Powell's newsletter. I took a long time thinking of that title. And I'm on. You can find me on my website, which is just GarethLPowell.com. And that's got links to everything on there as well. So yeah, you can find me pretty easily, I think.
Perfect. So yeah, just type in Gareth L. Powell and he'll come up. But yeah, so yeah, until next time, this was a lot of fun. I'll be back next week. I have author Anthony Johnston coming on. He's the author of Atomic Blonde, and he's written for video games like Resident Evil, Village, and things like that. He's a cool dude. So he'll be following you up next week, which will be a lot of fun. So until then, chat. Thanks for listening. Like I said, go follow and buy Gareth's books if you haven't already. Like and subscribe to the channel. That helps me out quite a bit, which is fun. And we'll see you all next week. So adios, people.